When my daughter-in-law called to wish me happy birthday and mentioned that my son had sent me something special, I told her I'd already passed it along to my accountant. She laughed and said, "Oh, how lovely." Then I heard her go quiet. Then I heard her whisper something away from the phone. Then I heard my son's voice in the background say, very slowly, "He gave it to who?" That was the moment I knew I'd been right all along. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this will make sense unless you understand what kind of man my son had become, and more importantly, what kind of man he thought I was. My name is Gordon Whitfield. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a forensic accountant for the New Zealand Serious Fraud Office. First in Wellington, then in Auckland. Before I retired at 59 with a reasonable pension, a modest house on the Hibiscus Coast, and the quiet satisfaction of a career spent catching people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. My wife, Patricia, passed away from ovarian cancer 4 years ago. She was 57. That kind of loss changes a man in ways that are difficult to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. You stop caring about small things. You start paying very close attention to the things that matter. My son's name is Callum. He's 34 now. His mother and I had him young. She was 24. I was 26, and we raised him in a house full of love and, I think, too much indulgence. Patricia had a generous heart. She forgave easily, perhaps too easily, and Callum learned early that consequences were negotiable. I tried to be the firmer hand, but when the person you love most in the world looks at you with soft eyes and says, "Gordon, give the boy a chance," you give the boy a chance. You give him chance after chance after chance. By the time Callum was in his late 20s, he had burned through 2 business ventures with money we'd lent him, a marriage that lasted 18 months, and most of the goodwill of his extended family. His ex-wife, a kind woman named Saoirse, who I still think of fondly, kept sole custody of their daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who is now 7 years old and the most important person in my life. Callum paid child support when it suited him and disappeared for months at a time when it didn't. After Patricia died, Callum came to the funeral, stood at the back, and left before the wake. I didn't hear from him for 11 months. When he did reappear, he was living in Christchurch with a woman I'd never met, talking about a new business opportunity in property development, and wondering casually, carefully, the way someone does when they've rehearsed it, whether I'd had a chance to review my will recently. I told him I had everything sorted. He smiled and said, "Good, good. Just want to make sure you're looked after, Dad." I watched his face when he said it. I'd spent 3 decades watching faces. I knew what a man looked like when he was calculating something. That conversation stayed with me through the autumn and into winter. I didn't lose sleep over it, but I didn't forget it either. I mentioned it to my friend and former colleague, a man named David Tran, who had done family law for 20 years before moving into estate planning. We had lunch together every few weeks at a place in Orewa that did a decent fish chowder. I told him what Callum had said, and David put down his spoon and looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has heard that exact story many times before. "Have you checked your will lately?" he asked. "I know what's in it," I said. "That's not the same thing," he said. I called his office the following Monday and booked an appointment to review my estate documents. It was a routine precaution. I wasn't alarmed. I simply wanted to be thorough. That was in late July. My birthday is the 14th of September. 3 weeks before my birthday, I noticed something small and easily missed. I keep my important documents in a locked fireproof box in the wardrobe in my bedroom. I've kept it there for years. The combination is something only I know, it's not written down anywhere. But when I opened the box that evening to find an old insurance document, I noticed the papers inside were not in the order I keep them. I'm a particular man. I organize by date, oldest at the back, most recent at the front. The order had been reversed. I stood there for a long moment looking at those papers. Then I closed the box, replaced it exactly as I'd found it, and sat down on the edge of the bed. Someone had been in my house. I didn't panic. Panic is a luxury I gave up sometime in my early 40s. I thought through it methodically. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was missing. Only one room had been visited, mine, and only the box had been touched. Whoever had been here knew what they were looking for and where it was. The front door lock was a standard deadbolt, the kind that can be opened with a copied key. Patricia and I had given Callum a key years ago, when he was still someone we trusted with such things. I had never asked for it back. That had been careless of me. The following morning I had a locksmith come and rekey the entire house. Then I installed a small camera in the hallway, angled toward the bedroom door. It ran on a battery pack and connected to my phone. I didn't tell anyone about it. I also made a phone call to David. "Someone's been through my documents," I told him. There was a pause. "Are they in order? I need you to check something for me," I said. David had contacts at the land registry and at the registrar of companies. I gave him the details he needed and asked him to look quietly. He called me back 2 days later with a voice I hadn't heard from him in a long time. Careful, precise. The way he spoke when he was about to deliver information that required a considered response. "Gordon," he said, "someone has submitted a variation to your enduring power of attorney. It was filed 6 weeks ago. It lists Callum as your attorney for property matters." I sat with that for a moment. "That's not my signature," I said. "I didn't think it would be," he said. The document had been filed using a photocopy of my identification and a signature that was, I had to admit, a competent forgery. Not perfect, I had signed my name the same distinctive way for 40 years, but competent enough to pass a cursory review. Someone had studied my signature. Someone had access to copies of my ID. Both of those things were in the fireproof box. David and I met for lunch the following week. I didn't bring the information to the police yet. I wanted to understand the full shape of what Callum was doing before I moved. I'd learned that from my years at the fraud office. If you arrest someone before you understand the complete scheme, you only ever catch part of it. You want the whole picture. Over the next 2 weeks, David helped me quietly and methodically document everything. The forged EPA. A second document we found had been submitted to my KiwiSaver provider, attempting to add Callum as a beneficiary in a way that would override the existing designation. That one had been rejected by the provider on a technicality, a box left unticked, but it showed the direction of travel. Callum was building a paper trail designed to give him control of my assets while I was still alive and access to them after I was gone. I thought about Lily during all of this. She was the real intended victim, in a way she would never understand. Whatever Callum drained from my estate would not go to her. It would go to his lifestyle, his debts, his next failed venture. Lily's inheritance, what I had carefully saved and intended to leave to her, would be the casualty. That thought hardened something in me that I hadn't realized needed hardening. My birthday arrived on a mild Thursday in September. The Pohutukawa down the road was just beginning to show the first small flashes of red at the tips of its branches. I had plans to spend the afternoon with Lily. Sersa brought her every second weekend, and she'd been looking forward to a trip to the Auckland Zoo that I'd promised her grandfather could manage. We had a good day. Lily held my hand and talked to the giraffes very seriously about the importance of eating their greens. I took photographs and felt, for a few hours, like a man without complicated problems. When I got home that evening, there was a package on my doorstep. It was a bottle of whiskey. Proper presentation, a good-looking box, a ribbon, a small card in an envelope. The card said, "Happy birthday, Dad. Thought you'd like this one. Callum." The bottle inside was a single malt, a New Zealand label from a Central Otago distillery, the kind that sells for about $120. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen bench. I looked at it for a long time. $120 was more than Callum had spent on me in the last 5 years combined. A man who had been going through my documents, forging my signature, and trying to redirect my financial assets, does not suddenly send a generous birthday gift out of sentimentality. He does it because he wants something, or because he wants to create an impression, or because he is trying to establish goodwill ahead of something he is planning, or because there is something wrong with the bottle. Now, I want to be careful here, because what I am about to tell you might sound like the thinking of a paranoid man, and I understand that. I'm a man who spent 31 years detecting fraud. I am, by professional habit, suspicious in ways that are sometimes excessive. I acknowledge that. But I am also a man who had recently discovered that his son had forged his signature on legal documents and entered his home without permission. Given that context, I did not think it was unreasonable to be cautious about an expensive and unexpected gift. I did not open the bottle. The following morning I drove it to David's office and explained my thinking. I told him I was probably being overly careful, but that I wanted to have it checked before I dismissed the concern. David looked at the bottle, then looked at me. He knew a forensic chemist through his professional network, a woman who consulted for law firms on product liability cases. Her name was Dr. Anita Solevu, and she worked out of a laboratory in Mount Albert. David called her while I was sitting in his office, and she agreed to see us that afternoon. I left the bottle with her. She said she would call us within 48 hours. She called us in 22. The whiskey contained a concentration of a compound called ethylene glycol. It's the main component in antifreeze. It is colorless, has a slightly sweet taste that is masked easily in spirits, and it is toxic in sufficient quantities. The concentration in the bottle, Dr. Solevu told us, was not immediately lethal from a single glass, but was well above the threshold for causing serious kidney damage. Consumed over several evenings by a man who enjoyed a quiet whiskey before bed, the way she described it. I understood that whoever prepared this had thought about the habits of the intended recipient. It would, over time, produce symptoms consistent with gradual organ failure. I sat in David's office after that phone call, and I did not speak for a while. David didn't rush me. He's been in my house, I finally said. He knows I have a whiskey most evenings. He knows I don't share drinks. He knows I live alone. Gordon, David said quietly, we need to go to the police. We went that afternoon. The detective who handled the initial report was a woman named Sergeant Hemi. Composed, unhurried, the kind of officer who listened more than she spoke. I gave her everything. The forged EPA, the Kiwi Saver document, the evidence of entry, the camera footage from my hallway, which, it turned out, had captured a 30-second clip of Callum letting himself in with a copied key at 11 in the morning on a Wednesday 3 weeks prior, and Dr. Solevu's laboratory report. Sergeant Hemi looked at the camera footage without expression. Is that your son? She asked. Yes, I said. She looked at me, then back at the screen. All right, she said. The investigation that followed took 6 weeks. I won't describe all of it because much of it is now subject to suppression conditions, but I can tell you the broad shape. Callum was arrested at his Christchurch address on a Tuesday morning in late October. He was charged with forgery, obtaining by deception, and administering a harmful substance with intent to cause bodily harm. His partner, who had emerged, had some awareness of the plan, was interviewed, but not charged. On the evening of my birthday, while I'd been at the zoo with Lily, Callum had called my phone. I hadn't answered. He'd left a voicemail. Hey Dad, just checking in. Hope you're having a good one. Did you get my package? Give us a call when you try it. Would love to know what you think. I had listened to that message twice. The second time, I had understood what it was. Not a birthday greeting, but a check. He wanted to know if I'd opened it. He was monitoring the timeline, When the police called him to ask some routine questions in the early stages of the investigation, he apparently believed at first that it was about something unrelated. It was only when the detective mentioned the bottle that his composure, by all accounts, came apart. I wasn't there for that conversation. But David, who had been briefed by the investigating team, told me later that Callum had asked, in a voice that apparently went quite thin, who else had access to the bottle. I thought about that for a long time afterward. He had spent months planning. He'd obtained a copy of my key, entered my home, photographed my documents, practiced my signature, filed fraudulent paperwork, and prepared a poisoned gift. And in all of that planning, across all those months, the possibility that I might simply not drink it, that I might give it away, or leave it on a shelf, or hand it to my accountant as a gift, apparently never occurred to him. That is what happens when someone decides they know exactly who you are. They stop paying attention to what you actually do. Lily doesn't know any of this. She knows that her father has gone away for a while, which is not very different from the situation she's grown up with. Saoirse has been kind and measured in how she speaks to Lily about her father, and I have followed her lead. There will be a time, perhaps when Lily is older and asks harder questions, when more of the truth will need to be told. But that time is not now. Right now, she needs stability, and I can give her that. I see her every second weekend. We have standing plans for the zoo, for the beach, for baking on rainy afternoons. Last month, she decided to teach me how to make pikelet, which she had learned at school. They were slightly thick and wonderfully uneven, and she was very proud of them. I ate 4 and told her they were the best I'd ever had, which was not entirely untrue. I think about Patricia sometimes, in these quieter moments. She was a woman who believed in second chances, and I wonder what she would have made of all this. I think she would have grieved it deeply. I think she would also, eventually, have understood. There are things you can forgive, and there are things that simply are what they are, facts, not failures. And part of growing older is learning to tell the difference between the two. I changed my will in October, before the arrest. Lily is the primary beneficiary of everything I have. Saoirse is named as trustee until Lily turns 25. David reviewed every document personally. The fireproof box now has a different combination. And I know, because I checked, that everything inside it is exactly in the order I left it. The pohutukawa at the end of my road came into full flower in December, which it does every year without fail. Red as anything, brilliant against the blue sky. I walked past it with Lily on a Sunday afternoon, and she stopped and stared at it with her mouth open. "Granddad," she said, "it looks like it's on fire." "It does," I said. "But it's not actually on fire," she said, checking. "No," I said. "It's just being what it is." She thought about that for a moment, then took my hand, and we kept walking. There are things I want to say to anyone who might be listening to this story and recognizing something in it, perhaps a relationship in your own life that feels uncertain, or a gut feeling you keep dismissing because the alternative is too uncomfortable to consider. Trust, real trust, is not something you extend by default to people simply because they share your blood or your history. It is something that is demonstrated, consistently, through action over time. When the actions stop matching the words, pay attention to that. Your instincts have access to information that your conscious mind sometimes refuses to process. Document what matters to you. Not out of suspicion, but out of care. Care for yourself and for the people who depend on you. A will, a power of attorney, a beneficiary designation. These are not morbid preoccupations. They are acts of love. When you leave your affairs in good order, you protect the people you love from having to fight over the pieces of a life that was not clearly expressed. If someone in your life is asking questions about your finances or your estate with an urgency or specificity that feels off, you are allowed to notice that. You are allowed to ask direct questions. You are allowed to speak to a lawyer, a trusted friend, a financial advisor, someone outside the dynamic who can give you a clear perspective. And finally, the most dangerous assumption any of us can make is that the people who want to take advantage of us have underestimated us. Sometimes they have studied us very carefully, and they know exactly which version of us to exploit, the version that wants to believe the best, the version that hopes this time will be different, the version that loves someone despite the evidence. Being alert doesn't mean being cold. It means being clear-eyed. Those are different things. I'm 63 years old. I have a granddaughter who makes uneven pikelets and talks to giraffes. I have a good friend who eats fish chowder with me in Orewa and tells me things I need to hear. I have a house on the Hibiscus coast where the windows face north and the light in the afternoons is something I never take for granted. That is enough. That is, in fact, quite a lot.